You're listening to Politics Within Reason, the official podcast of the Party of Reason and Progress. Hey, while you're listening, why not follow us, like, and give us a share? Here's your host from New Mexico, Dr. Michael Ham.
Welcome to Politics Within Reason. Tonight we have a special guest, David Baake. He's running for Congress in New Mexico's 2nd District. David, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
David, you have been a bit of an unconventional candidate. You're running and you haven't had much of a background in politics, but could you go ahead and give us an explanation of why you decided to run this year?
You're right. I am somewhat of an unconventional candidate. I'm 28 years old, so quite a bit younger than many people who are throwing their hat in the ring. However, I have had some quite good experience, I think, that makes me qualified to run for this office. So I grew up on the border, the international border, as well as the Texas-New Mexico border, down in the Sunland Park area.
Double border.
Yeah. I mean, so Mount Cristo Rey is the sort of the point where all three of those jurisdictions meet, and that's about a mile from the house I grew up in. I, spent time all over New Mexico growing up, hiking and camping with my family. I had an uncle who lived in Albuquerque my whole life, so made the trek from that part of the state all the way up. From my experiences in New Mexico, appreciating our public lands and appreciating our environment, I decided that I wanted to go into a career of environmental protection. So I went to college at Arizona State and I studied biology and philosophy. And a lot of people thought that was kind of a strange combination, but it actually fed perfectly into what I wanted to do, which is environmental law. So after I graduated from Arizona State, I went to Harvard Law School and focused on environmental law. I interned at the Sierra Club, as well as the Department of Justice, worked on the Harvard Environmental Law Journal, so did a lot of reading and writing on the policy aspects of this. And then I spent a year at the Natural Resources Defense Council. At NRDC, I did a lot of advocacy related to the Clean Power Plan, which was President Obama's policy that was supposed to undergird our entry into the Paris Climate Agreement. As you know, Donald Trump got rid of that policy and decided to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. So a lot of the work that I did was for now really. But it's laid the groundwork for what will come next when we get a better administration in there. But yeah, as part of this work, I testified before EPA. I litigated before the DC Circuit, which is the second most powerful court in our nation. I met with members of the Obama White House on several occasions to talk about these policies.
The case that you litigated, was it anything really interesting?
Yeah, so it was the Clean Power Plan.
Okay.
Litigation. So I don't want to get too into the legal details here, since I'm sure most of your listeners are not attorneys. But basically, Scott Pruitt, who is now the head of EPA, was bringing all of these lawsuits against EPA, trying to block various good things the agency was doing. And so we intervened on EPA's behalf to represent the environmental groups and try to defend these policies. And we were successful in the early rounds, but then the election kind of put the litigation on hold and said EPA is probably going to rethink what it's going to do. So we never actually got to the final outcome, but the preliminary stages were quite good in that litigation. So anyway, I've had some pretty good experience. I've worked with Congress as well in that capacity. I drafted letters that were signed by members of Congress, and so I kind of understand the environment of how policy gets made pretty well. I also spent some time clerking for some federal judges, which basically means you're the ghostwriter, if not the assistant judge, and worked on all kinds of fascinating federal law issues. I was actually in the courtroom during the Sheriff Arpaio contempt hearing, although that wasn't my judge who was presiding over that, but I snuck out of work to go watch that. So I've seen all kinds of interesting cases.
So you've already participated in a lot of milestones in recent American history. That's really cool. And
yeah, I would say I've seen some interesting things anyway. I don't know that I was that much of an active participant, but,
sure, but you were there.
Yeah.
And along those lines, you've been now really using your resources to talk about DACA. Could you explain DACA to everybody and what your take on it is?
Sure. So by the time this podcast goes out, it may no longer exist. But as with so many, as so many good things that happened during the Obama administration. DACA stands for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. And it was a policy implemented by President Obama in 2012. Basically, this was implemented because there was a proposal that had been around, a bipartisan proposal called the DREAM Act. And it was to provide a reprieve from deportation and work authorization for people who were brought here as children, undocumented immigrants. And there were certain conditions. You had to go to finish high school or enroll in the military. And obviously, you had to not commit any crimes. But if those conditions were satisfied, you would be given a reprieve from deportation and eventually a path to citizenship. And the argument, of course, is that these people did nothing wrong. A lot of them came here when they were, 6, 7, 8 years old. This is the only country they've ever known. They're completely integrated into our society. A lot of them don't even speak Spanish or whatever the native language is that their parents came from.
There's been the recent stories of the DACA recipients in Houston who have been rescuing people. One even died while he was out there trying to rescue people. They're just part of our society, and they have been for a long time.
Right. And so what Obama did is when Congress couldn't get its act together and pass this law, he determined that he had legal authority to go ahead and create a program that wasn't quite as expansive as the DREAM Act, but basically offered work authorization and a reprieve from deportation. And this was actually modeled off of executive policies that were done under Reagan and Bush, and were not considered controversial at that time. The president has a wide discretion in terms of enforcing the law. And I mean, if you don't believe that, look at Colorado. I mean, look at the legal marijuana industry in that state. Federal law prohibits marijuana completely, but the Department of Justice has said we're going to turn a blind eye to that. So that's actually a much larger and more novel decision than the DACA decision ever was. DACA is well within the tradition of decades and decades of immigration policy of creating certain groups that are, by the letter of the law, could be deported, but recognizing that the government has limited resources, that these people should be a very low priority. So that was the policy. And Trump is expected to rescind the policy tomorrow, probably is going to rely on the argument, on a legal argument that the president didn't have the authority to do that. As I've said, that's, I think, a loser. There was a very careful legal analysis before this was done. The president's lawyers and the White House lawyer and the Department of Justice lawyers determined that it was well within the scope of what Congress actually intended when it enacted these immigration laws. And in fact, the immigration laws kind of have this special category of deferred action that's already recognized in the statute. So pretty hard to argue that it was kind of that much of a break from prior practice.
It's also a funny argument from an administration that has used executive action on immigration already, right? They've already filed a lot of executive actions on immigration. Clearly, they could continue.
Right. And I think that that's a good point, that this is not an administration that has been shy about using executive power in unconventional ways to shape immigration policy and as well as other policies. So, yeah, I mean, the practical consequences of this are going to, assuming that Congress does not step in, the practical consequences will be quite dire. I mean, 800,000 people who have received deferred action under this program. And that means that they've been told by the government since 2012, so the people who've been in this program for 5 years now, that we're not going to deport you and you can get legal authorization. So we have people who are finishing med school or finishing their residency. We have attorneys who are part of this program. We have all kinds of people who are making really, amazing contributions to our society. And they've done that in reliance on the idea that they weren't going to get deported. They were going to have a path. Now those people are potentially going to get torn apart from this country, torn apart from the relationships that they've formed here, the families that they have. And one of the things I like to talk about too when I talk about DACA is it's not just, these are sort of an especially sympathetic group of people, but we also need to remember that there are a lot of other people who are not childhood arrivals, but are still really suffering under this administration's approach to immigration. Mothers and fathers who've been here for decades. I mean, there was a woman in Las Cruces who'd been here for 18 years. She came here legally, actually, on a visa and was applying for asylum. And the government denied her petition for asylum, but it never told her that she had to leave. So she just stayed. She had 2 children. One of them's an American citizen, was really active in her church, paid her taxes every year, started a small business. And she was deported recently. So you have all these people who are just, really part of, pillars of our community that are getting torn apart. And it's not just a concern for those people and their families. I mean, this is hurting our entire economy. It's hurting our entire society because you have job creators who are getting deported. You have really bright young students who could be developing new technologies and could be contributing to medicine.
Right. I mean, Apple has 250 people employed there, and they're very upset about the idea of them being deported.
A lot of the high-tech industries do have quite a few DACA people. So, that's the important thing to keep in mind, that this isn't just about, the humanitarian consequences are quite dire, and we need to keep that in mind. However, it's not just a humanitarian argument. This is, what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be kicking out the best and the brightest, or some of the best and the brightest, based on some arcane legal argument? Doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. And from a selfish point of view, America has invested a lot of money in these folks, right? We've been paying for their, schooling, college, and now they're out there ready to contribute, and we're going to kick them out, right? It's
right.
Mexico's going to get some great talent if this happens.
Yeah.
And Korea. It's not just Mexico, of course.
Right. Right. No, I think that's absolutely right. But these are folks that, and people have tried to muddy the waters and saying, oh, well, what about the ones that are criminals? It's like, actually, you cannot be a DACA recipient if you've committed a crime.
Just by definition, you're one of the very good ones, and most of them are good ones, right? That's the key here.
Right.
Yeah. We encouraged people last week in our pod to contact Congress because the fact that DACA had to exist is a bit of a failure of Congress to act. And in some respects, Trump is right to say Congress should act, and hopefully they will, but we've already seen it fail once. And
it was the same thing in some of the environmental work that I did, where President Obama was having to pursue executive action because Congress was not doing its job. With immigration, we certainly need comprehensive forum, because that's another thing that people often say is, oh, well, what's the big deal with these dreamers? Why do we need to give them special treatment? Can't they just go to the back of the line? There is no line. For most of these people, if you want to come from Mexico, even if you have a parent or a child who's a citizen, you're looking at, decades.
If you get elected into Congress, do you have some ideas about how to get past all this gridlock that has just been less and less productive throughout my life, right? I sort of remember maybe during the Clinton years, it felt like things could get done. People could still work together. Right. And then it's just progressively got worse and worse. Could you do anything?
Look, I think it's very hard for any one congressperson to break through what is not just a political gridlock. It's a cultural, there's deep cultural roots to that. Look, we have people who only watch Fox News and some people who only watch MSNBC. And we're not even living in the same universe. We have an entire political party basically that denies the climate is changing, even though, 192 countries signed on to an agreement to stop it and basically said this is an environmental disaster of something of a scale we've never seen before. That, it's a gargantuan challenge to come together when you don't even agree on the facts. I do think that there is something to be said for new ideas, new leadership, people who can find ways to talk about some of these issues that are, that can appeal to people on both sides.
Yeah.
But most of it is just communication. And look, we're not going to have the type of immigration reform we want in this country, or that I want in this country, until people are dissuaded from the idea that undocumented immigrants are somehow criminals, that all of them are involved in criminal activity. Until we're just, we break this idea that immigrants steal our jobs. That relies on a completely false understanding of how the economy works. Like, there's not a fixed number of jobs in the economy. Like, there's 50 million jobs and, first come, first serve. That's not how it works. The more people you have, the more jobs that get created, the more dynamic your economy is.
Why is it so hard to get that kind of message out? Whereas the message of, everyone's a criminal, that's easy to get out and spread. Why? Do you have any idea why that is?
I could venture a guess. I've read, there's a great book by, I think his name Daniel Kahneman. Let me just look it up here.
Right.
Yeah,
I was looking it up.
He's a behavioral economist and has written a lot of really interesting stuff about how the mind works and how we're very, in a lot of ways, we're very motivated by fear, and a message that triggers a fear-based reaction will stick with people even if it's not based in reality. I mean, it's a fact, but so there's no basis in reality for this idea that immigrants are somehow more likely to commit crimes. In fact, the opposite is true.
Yeah, immigrants, studies show this.
Yeah, it's well documented that immigrants commit fewer crimes than native-born people. So I don't know why that message is stuck. But I think Democrats need to do, and progressives and people who care about this issue need to do a better job of really making this proactive case for immigration. And this is where some of our brightest people have come from. One thing that I've said a lot in some of my talks is that, hermit kingdoms are not prosperous places. I mean, we don't want to be North Korea. We don't want to have a massive wall and keep everyone out, because closed borders are closed minds, and you don't have the type of innovation that you need to really be a thriving economy. And that we've had in our past. I mean, that's how we got to being the richest nation on earth, was being a place where people from all over the world wanted to come, wanted to contribute. And by and large, we let them do that. Obviously, we've had some dark times in our history and we did it. But
yeah, it's strange that people aren't afraid of shrinking the economy by not bringing in immigrants. We've had such great success. And it's strange that the fear is not, without more immigrants, we're actually going to fall behind and make it worse for everyone. The fear is quite the opposite. But okay, there is one thing that everybody does seem to agree on, which is we love public lands. Republicans, Democrats. And one of the really cool things about going through your public media is seeing all the great places you've gone in New Mexico. It looks like you've been on some big hikes recently.
Yeah. So, as I said, kind of in the beginning, this is sort of a tradition that goes back to when I was very small. My parents took me hiking in the Oregon mountains before I was old enough to walk. We went backpacking in the Gila Wilderness every year. My grandfather actually baptized me in the Gila River. He was a Presbyterian minister, and we went and did it there. Just all of our really, really great. I mean, New Mexico is a very beautiful state with a lot of natural diversity. So, yeah, I was recently up this last weekend. I was visiting Acoma Pueblo for their feast day, and that's a stunning location in and of itself. But I also took the time, an 8-mile hike at El Malpais National Monument, which is just near Grants, New Mexico.
Is that the one with the arch, where you saw the arch?
Yes. Yeah. So they have the largest natural arch in New Mexico, at least. Yeah, I think it's the largest one. And it also has miles and miles of pretty recent volcanic rock that has been deposited there. So really interesting landscape. Get all over the state. I mean, I love to get out to White Sands. I like to go horseback riding over near Alamogordo. There's some good places there. So it's one of the things I really love about New Mexico. And our district, actually, I don't know if your listeners are aware, but it's the largest in the country that's not its own state. So, Alaska has only one representative, so that person has to make it, one into the other. But in terms of, New Mexico has 3 districts, but our district is still much larger than many states. And so that's one of the things that...
Do you plan to tour by horseback the entire district? You could do that if you get elected.
Yeah. It would take quite a while. I mean, it takes long enough in a car to get from, Lordsburg to Hobbs. I think it's 6 hours. So that's all. Wow. You never leave the district. So
wow. So you've got a mix of old and new here. One of the reasons I actually knew of your campaign is that you just contacted people on Facebook. It seems like you have this really unique engagement strategy.
Yeah, I mean, so we're trying all sorts of things to get our message out there. And, we're doing the traditional methods as well. We've done an announcement video. We have the website. We're doing traditional fundraising. We're doing, the traditional stuff you do, but also trying to do, social media engagement is really big. Started kind of getting into the political world here. Is that I would have a meeting with someone and they would add me on Facebook. And at first I thought it was strange. But then I just figured that that's how people do it here. Like Bill McCamley, he's a state rep here. And he's reached them. I don't know if you know this. There's actually a maximum number of friends you can have on your personal Facebook.
No, I didn't know that.
It's 5,000. And so I can't be friends with him because he's maxed out. And so I just kind of saw a lot of folks were doing this. And so, yeah, we will go through and I mean, I have to warn your listeners, if they like anything, if they like this podcast, we'll probably send them a request.
Actually, go like the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll like it. He's good.
If you like any of my op-eds that we run, and we'll add you. So to me, I think it's a really good way of keeping people in the loop of what we're doing, and it's actually really nice to have people be my personal friends as well, because then they can see like the photos that I'm posting from various hikes and stuff, things that aren't really wouldn't go on the campaign page necessarily, but are still ways of
they get to keep up with you.
People getting to know me and kind of get a sense of whether they can trust me or not. Hopefully they determine that they can, because I really actually do care about these issues.
Absolutely. So if you do get elected this next year in 2018, it'll probably be a wave election like we saw in 2008, where a Democrat actually did win your district for the first time in a long time, and then they didn't win. Do you have any kind of plans to keep appealing to that entire district?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that will be interesting is actually this district is set to be redistricted in 2020. So that's always a possibility. But I've talked to people who are Trump voters who told me they were Republicans, but they did emphasize that what they really want is an advocate. And they don't need to agree with you on everything if they feel like you're actually getting things done. I mean, so you mentioned the 2008 election. So that was Harry Teague who got elected that year. And when I sat down with Harry, one of the things he told me was that one of the most important part of his job was not actually like passing legislation, but was acting as an advocate for individual constituents. So individual constituents will come in and say, I'm trying to file my claim for VA benefits or for Social Security benefits, and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm getting stuck in this bureaucratic hole. And Harry Teague would just call up the VA and say, "Hey, what's going on with Bill's file? Can we do something about this?" And it would actually work. And so I think that when you talk to people, even if they're not necessarily agreeing with you on all of the policy points, if you can convince them that you're going to listen to them, you're going to be there, you're going to take their concerns seriously, and you're going to advocate for them as best you can, I think that will go a long way to getting some of these more moderate, more conservative people comfortable with me as a representative.
Yeah, New Mexico isn't as partisan state as many others. We have a Republican governor, we've had Democrat governors, we've had Gary Johnson. We're not too heavily one way or the other for the most part. And on that line, one of the big questions that everybody has now is healthcare. And so what's your vision for healthcare if you get elected? What would you work towards? How would that help your district?
Sure. Well, our district is already incredibly reliant on government healthcare programs. And that's one of the reasons why it was so shocking that Steve Pierce, the current representative, actually voted for the American Health Care Act to repeal Obamacare. Because 44% of people in our district, including thousands of people in nursing homes and children with disabilities, are beneficiaries of Medicaid. So 44% are on Medicaid. When you include other forms of government health care, including Indian Health Care Program and Medicare, you're looking at a majority of the district that is already, and the VA, already on some form of government healthcare. So I do think that but there's still people who fall through the gaps. And I think that we definitely need to be, first of all, defending all of those programs that we already have, because they have been under attack. And were it not for John McCain having a moment of conscience, we could have lost the whole thing.
Yeah, by one vote. That's just staggering.
We cannot be complacent. We need to make sure we're fighting to maintain that. And the Trump administration is already looking like it's trying to sabotage Obamacare through the executive actions in terms of they're not putting any money into funding the advertisements for signing up for healthcare. So, people don't know that it's coming up. They may not enforce the individual mandate. I mean, there's still a lot of ways that they could wreck what had been actually a quite successful program. So we need to defend that. We need to make sure it's being administered correctly. But in long term, I do think we need to make sure we're going toward a system of universal coverage. And I mean, I think healthcare is a right. If people in this country aren't able to get the care they need, that's a problem the government needs to come in and solve.
I'm with you, actually. I like the idea of the private sector doing most things in the U.S., but healthcare is one of those things that you just can't plan ahead for, and it doesn't work very well.
Well, and the interesting thing, too, about government versus private administration contrary to what many people believe, government administration of these type of programs can actually be much, much more efficient. I mean, Social Security is a perfect example where they spend less than 1% of their program budget on administration.
Yeah, it has to be one of the most efficient programs out there.
99% is on benefits.
Right.
So find me a single private insurer who has, anything close to that. Find me a charity. I mean, your best charities in the world are going to have 8 or 9% administrative costs. So government can actually be pretty good at these type of programs. And, this is not to say, I agree with you that there are many areas of the economy where we need to have robust competition. So I'm quite happy to live in a capitalistic society, but healthcare is one area where
capitalism fails to really provide the best results, I think.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
And looking towards the future, we're about to see what I think is going to be a huge artificial intelligence revolution. And I'm curious what you're thinking, if you were to get elected, what you might do to prepare the country for that.
Well, I'm very happy to be asked this question because I don't think it's on people's radar, but it is on my radar, and I think it needs to, more people need to be thinking about this. So the McKinsey consulting firm has put out a study that suggested that over half of jobs in the United States economy are susceptible to being replaced with automation. So certainly your truck drivers, your delivery people, anyone that can be replaced with a self-driving car, in 10 years may no longer have a job. Cashiers are also being, could be phased out. I mean, I'm an attorney. Even a lot of legal work can be, routine legal work can eventually be phased out. So, I think that we really need to start thinking about employment in a new way in this country, commit to ensuring that people who want to work and want to contribute to society have a way to do that. And again, this goes back to what the free market is good at and what it's not. The free market is great at making sure that people with money have the things that they want to buy. We all want the latest iPhone with the newest capabilities. Yeah, the market's going to get that. I mean, it will get you the best iPhone that you could possibly want. Will it employ anyone doing that? That just depends on whether real human workers are cheaper than robots. So I don't think we can rely on the free market to provide employment necessarily. And I think that we need to be looking into public works programs. And even Bill Gates has suggested a robot tax to pay for public employment. So when a technophile like Bill Gates, one of the most successful capitalists, if not the most ever, is calling for this type of program, we need to take it seriously. So I've actually written an article in the Algorithm Journal calling for a climate conservation corps, which would put people to work put people suffering from long-term unemployment, put them to work on clean energy projects, on other things about climate change, because that's an area where we have another market failure, where work that we really need to see get done is not being done by the market. So, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's hire these people, get them good wages, good benefits, get them feeling productive, and get take a bite out of this environmental crisis at the same time.
Yeah, that's I think an innovative idea for how we might address this going forward, because I really do think we're not paying enough attention. And I'm really happy to hear that you have been thinking about this already. One of the interesting things we're going to have with this AI is, for example, the Russians hacking the election, and maybe not hacking in the way you might think, breaking into the voting machines, but they've found a way to amplify attack messages that often were fake, right? The fake news, the infamous fake news. They could amplify this through social media quickly, especially to attack Democrats. And before it could be debunked, they were on to the next one. Are there ways forward in our society where we can address this quickly?
I mean, that is a fascinating question. And it certainly raises all kinds of interesting free speech issues. I mean, there's always been this debate. When does the right to have your communications be private trump the right to disclose those communications? And so that would apply to the hacking. And the Supreme Court has usually said, well, even if you got the information illegally, like you're still basically protected in releasing it. But we may need to rethink some of those legal rules if we do start to see, this type of hacking being used in a way that is completely detrimental to our functioning of our democracy. And in terms of the social media, the fake news and all that, I mean, I think Facebook has done some things to address it. The tech giants will probably be the ones that will be on the forefront of that. But it is certainly an interesting question to kind of ponder. And yeah, certainly what we saw in that last election was really scary.
Yeah, I was very worried. And it seems like the attacks aren't letting up. Right now, they're going after things like Antifa, the anti-fascist groups, which maybe aren't the most sympathetic groups because there's elements within them that do a lot of property damage, but they are standing up to white supremacists and Nazis, and they're going out there and they're telling them this isn't okay, and they're outnumbering them by huge amounts, and the vast majority are quite peaceful. Right. But the smear campaign from the Russian bots this week have been really targeting those folks. And it's just been interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in uncharted territory when a white supremacist commits a terrorist attack and the president can't muster a convincing condemnation of it. I mean, yes, he did say he's against, he read from a script and said he condemned them. But, immediately afterward, David Duke praised him and said, thank you so much for being so fair. So I think it's a pretty good test that if white supremacists are praising you after you allegedly condemn them, you probably haven't condemned them strongly enough.
All right. Well, thank you, David Baake. Please check out his website, see what you think of his campaign. And we'll be posting some links to especially this op-ed he did in the Albuquerque Journal about AI and future employment. So thank you much, David.
Thank you very much.
Hey Nation, we want to hear from you, our listeners. So go ahead and reach out to us on Facebook or give us a call at 202-681-2274. We might even play you on the show. Politics Within Reason is a project of the Party of Reason and Progress, a registered 527 political organization. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes or whatever you use to listen to your podcasts. Thanks for your support, and until next week, this is Politics Within Reason.